The Department of Defense is making new investments in reducing operational energy demand. The Defense Secretary's senior climate advisor, Joe Bryan, says understanding climate change is important to national security and the Pentagon as a whole. Sharon Burke is president at Ecospherics. She's former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Operational Energy Plans and Programs. Thanks for joining me, Sharon. Let's talk about how DoD is moving to become more energy independent and why they're taking these steps.
They're taking these steps for two reasons. One is one about readiness and operations, and particularly in the future strategic landscape. So the way they use energy and the energy they use is going to make them a better military and make them more prepared for future missions. But then there's also the question of climate change and the way that it's going to shape and affect military missions and capabilities, that it's important for DoD to incorporate that into how they do business now.
Certainly, this is not entirely new, right, Sharon? This has been an area of attention. Do you see some new energy or funding behind it with the Biden administration's focus?
This is definitely nothing new. Energy on the battlefield has been an issue, going back to the problems of getting feed and fodder for horses. It's always an issue, and it's always a strategic shaping issue. So nothing new. But the Biden administration is taking a much more, the president made something like 350 promises on the campaign trail about climate security and about energy security. And he often explicitly talked about the role of the Department of Defense. So they're putting a lot more leadership commitment and more resources against these problems.
What about the role of other agencies? Are there opportunities for the Pentagon to work with other agencies on this issue?
Without a doubt. So this is a national security issue writ large, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a military issue, especially when you're talking about climate change. There's no question DoD needs to understand how climate change is going to shape future missions and affect, their bases and their capabilities, their platforms. But at the same time, really investing in dealing with climate change is largely a civil society and a civilian agency mission. So they can help define the risk, but the actual investment may be at AID or at the State Department. Still, DoD has its important role to play for its own capabilities as well.
Sure. And when DoD is also thinking about other partners, I assume industry plays a role here. How can the Pentagon help to change or drive industry behavior as it relates to this issue?
That's a great question, and I think one that they've already started to answer. There was a request for information that came out, I think, about 6 weeks ago that asked industry how exactly they're cutting greenhouse gas emissions and promoting environmental sustainability and security in their own operations. And I would interpret that as, in some ways, a shot across the bows, that they're going to start incorporating climate change and energy performance into the JSIDS process, into requirements and the acquisition process, and that the industry should be ready for that and be ready to show not just how they're cutting emissions in their own operations, but how they're incorporating that into what they build for the Department of Defense.
That's a really interesting point. It sounds like you think that DoD buying behavior really is an area where you could see some changes as a response to this. Is that fair?
That's certainly what the department's been telegraphing with this RFI and with what the president, the commander in chief, has been saying consistently about supply chain concerns and green procurement. So I think you'll see follow through on this, and industry should expect that.
As DoD leaders are starting to think about this, in all different parts of the department, do you have advice or recommendations on how they should be thinking about this issue and trying to think about how it might affect their individual missions or goals?
I do. I think, for one thing, that they should start incorporating climate risk and climate change into how they see their areas of responsibility, their missions, their capabilities. They should understand what the risks are, whether that's destabilization, whether that's partner demand for collaboration on these issues, whether that's a base where they may have access problems or readiness challenges, whether that's extreme weather that may affect, again, their platforms, as we've seen in U.S. bases such as Tyndall, where we had F-22s that were damaged and taken out of service. That full range, I think, especially understanding how it's going to shape future missions, where there might be destabilization, that will result in military missions. And also there are direct missions here in the Arctic, and also DISCA, defense support to civil authorities, and humanitarian and disaster response that I think sometimes I have heard defense officials say that's not really our core mission. Somebody else needs to step it up. But the nation's invested in them, and they're the ones that have the capabilities. And I think they need to get past that and accept that HADR and DISCA are their missions and will be, barring significant investments in more civil capacity.
I'm sure it's hard to take the temperature of an organization as large as DoD, but are you starting to see that mindset change? Any sort of anecdotal evidence there?
I think we're starting to see that mindset change for a variety of reasons, including that it can't be lost on anyone that even just at home, that we've had, record-setting floods, record-setting wildfires, record-setting cyclonic storms, record-setting heat, and that all of those things cross over into military missions. That can't be lost on anybody, that it's an opportunity cost, but also a real genuine mission, and is requiring more resources. But then I think COVID has really brought home what this looks like to us. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I got vaccinated, a soldier did my triage, an Air Force medic gave me a shot, and that's one thing. And then also the way that COVID is destabilizing globally is causing, all kinds of problems, including here at home. That's not, previously would have said that's not a military concern, it's not a military challenge, but I don't think it's lost on anybody that it could result in military missions and certainly risk to U.S. interests and people.
Thanks, Sharon. Appreciate the time.
My pleasure, anytime.